Determining who may seem relatively straightforward, though more often than not, we find out that it isn't. Often we find out painfully that it isn't. But if we begin with a situation, we usually can identify, to some extent, stakeholders that we believe are relevant based upon what we initially understand about the situation. Though as we proceed, we look at the implications of that situation and not doing anything. And then with the stakeholders that we've identified, we craft an ideal alternative, what we would like the situation to be, as opposed to simply trying to make the situation go away. And then we go ahead and ensure that we are not making invalid assumptions about the conclusions that we're arriving at. And then in conjunction with the stakeholders, the difference between the current situation and the ideal alternative represents a gap. And that gap, in conjunction with thinking about assumptions and invalid assumptions on an ongoing basis, because if we in fact arrive at conclusions based upon invalid assumptions, all of the things that we choose to do end up being messed up anyway. So the stakeholders actually consider the situation and identify those trends leading up to the situation. Now this ends up being a rather recursive process in that you might consider it trial and learning, so that you do some things to learn some things to understand that maybe you have identified all of the appropriate stakeholders and maybe you haven't, so that you may have to in fact get additional stakeholders engaged in the process once you begin to develop more and more of an understanding of what's associated with the situation, so that based upon the trends, you may realize that additional stakeholders need to be engaged, in which case you bring them into the process and bring them up to speed. But continuing along, you use the trends to help identify the related components which were created by some collection of stakeholders, then develop a set of relevant interactions, sort of sort out from this mess those relationships which are relevant to this particular situation, because those are the ones that are actually causing the situation, not all of them. And then from the relevant interactions, you identify the boundary. In other words, which things are within the purview of the identified set of stakeholders and which things are outside part of the environment that are simply constraints that one has to figure out how to deal with. Identify the leverage points, develop a strategy, adopt the new model based upon that strategy, and then monitor the new set of trends as a result of that adoption, and continuing to do that monitoring to see if there needs to be an adjustment along the way to continue to be on track to move in the direction of the ideal alternative, and thus reducing the gap. So that this is sort of what one has to, or what a group of stakeholders has to go through to understand what the situation is, what the relevant interacting components are, and figure out how to deal with them collectively. And as I said, a individual can go through this to a point and develop an understanding to identify the stakeholders that they perceive need to be engaged, and then that initial group of stakeholders can investigate and progress until they may find that there are additional stakeholders that need to be involved. It's only possible to effect a change to the extent that the engaged stakeholders are willing to change things. because they're the ones responsible for the set of interactions that have caused the situation to be the way it is, and they're the only ones that can define and adopt a new strategy to produce a new set of trends that move things in the direction of the ideal alternative. So understanding who as a point of beginning is not often as easy as it might seem, though it is in fact possible. So hope this has been meaningful, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye.